Thank you, everyone, for attending our Committee of the Whole meeting today. So we'll call our meeting to order and recognize that we're holding our meeting on the territories of the Hoobachesit and Sashot First Nations. Would somebody like to move agenda of our approval of our agenda? Second? All in favor? Carried. And we have minutes of our meeting held at 3:30 p.m. on January 21st, 2019. Second? All in favor? Carried. So for today's Committee of the Whole meeting, we have two separate topics that we're talking about. The first portion of our meeting, we have our consulting city planner, Joe Calenda, who's going to present his report, and this portion of the meeting will go until 3:30 p.m. At 3:30, we're going to take a recess, and then at 4 p.m., we'll come back for our Economic Development Manager and Manager of Planning to start our Committee of the Whole on the Harborview Lands. So welcome, Mr. Calenda. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
I'm not from here, but even I know there's something going on in this valley. There's a rising tide of investment opportunity, and it's draining into Port Alberni. The land cost to rent ratio, as it exists today, is attracting new and renewed interest in the development and redevelopment of your city. Its opportunities are greater than its threats, and its strengths are greater than its weaknesses. Certainly, it will take vision and strategic governance from council, careful city planning from staff, and financial courage from the right investors and community developers in partnership with your citizens to move Port Alberni forward. But this mayor and this council and this staff has the opportunity to steer and guide growth and development such that Port Alberni will become a better place in 1,400 days. And yet, there continues to be the tendency to plan and develop the city by consensus with the neighbors, sometimes to a fault, and sometimes with the result of losing investment and development opportunities. So how does council govern in an age of consultation, citizen engagement, and democracy? And how does council guide and steer the investment opportunity over the next 4 years where land is everything? The next 1,400 days is a strategy. It's a strategy for growing Port Alberni by providing for affordable housing and attainable housing through environmentally responsible development. And it's a strategy for growing Port Alberni by having a dialogue about the new city planning and governance for Port Alberni circa 2019. And in this strategy, land is everything. We recommend the following actions and initiatives to move Port Alberni forward. First, amend your OCP to achieve 70% attainable housing in the long term, being 15 to 20 years. Secondly, amend your zoning bylaw to provide for unfettered mortgage helpers for single-family lots. More on that later. Thirdly, amend the OCP to provide for a high-density multiple family residential overlay which provides for 7 stories or more. You don't have that now in your city. Fourth, prepare a community amenity contributions policy further to section 482 and 483 of the Local Government Act. That deals with bonus density zoning in exchange for amenities like affordable housing. And you do have a little bit of language in your zoning bylaw right now to try and encourage that, but then that needs to be beefed up quite a bit. 5, prepare a Southport revitalization strategy. 6, facilitate $10 a day daycare and improve the access to transit. 7, continue with strategic land banking, including zoning and marketing. In fact, do pre-zoning if you want. That helps with the marketing. 8, apply to the Agricultural Land Commission to remove the Agricultural Land Reserve designation on your 17-acre parcel at 5355 Cherry Creek Road. You've tried this twice already. I think 3 times will be a charm. 9, designate and zone that piece of land for high-density residential neighborhood. That means 10 stories plus. You don't have that here yet either, and you ought to. 10, consult the ACRD to identify a boundary extension area, including 17 acres more or less of ALR land. You want to bring that into the city so you can replace the 17 acres that you have already with another 17 acres of ALR land. The Agricultural Land Commission kind of requires you to do that before they will redesignate the lands. Okay? Now, I use Protecting the Planet and Helping the Poor to inform and inspire the next 1,400 days. And I use Protecting the Planet and Helping the Poor to inform and inspire the city planning in Port Alberni. And that comes from Laudato Si. This is Pope Francis's encyclical of 2015, and it's called In Care of Our Common Home. And he defines the planet and the poor as our home. And in about 150 pages of critical analysis, he looks at man, the environment, and the global economy, and the relationship between it, describes it as an integral ecology, and he says it's really quite a mess. It's not working at all. But it'll be made a whole lot better if we would only protect the planet and help the poor. So then the trick is to figure out, well, what does that mean in Port Alberni? So in Port Alberni, protecting the planet means using your land base carefully, fully, completely, and sustainably each and every time. And we reference environmentally responsible development, sweet spot city planning, First Nation land theology, and the long view, tax-based profit centers, economic sustainability at City Hall, the new city planning credo, and best practices in citizen engagement to get us there, to protect our part of the planet here in Port Alberni. And helping the poor in Port Alberni means a focus on housing. It means housing the poor through city planning to provide for attainable and affordable housing. Now, our poor are not only defined by inadequate housing, they're also defined by health issues, income shortages, food issues, hunger issues, social issues, and so on. But we feel using a social planning commission to look after the feeding, the healing, and the caring for the poor is where that part of helping the poor should be. And we think addressing inadequate housing for the poor, we do that through city planning to provide for attainable and affordable housing. And council might remember that staff are actually working on a report to establish a social planning commission. And if one is established, this is the kind of stuff they would look after. We recommend 9 best practices in city planning and governance to get us to the next 1,400 days. Best practice number 1. The best practice governance for city planning is to make your decisions consistent with the OCP each and every time. Now, the OCP is, by legislation, by provincial legislation, the primary planning document in your municipality. And all other plans, regulations, bylaws, and city planning decisions are to be consistent with it. And one of the functions of an OCP is to provide predictability about growth and development and the quality of life to be achieved in Port Alberni. And so the public, the greater public, should be able to rely on council to support its OCP each and every time. Now, council creates confusion in the investment market and diminishes the value of the OCP whenever it votes against it. This is a huge economic degenerator, and a municipality this size, we can't afford those economic degenerators. Now, you have it in your budget to rebuild your OCP in 2020. I'm going to recommend that you actually start that in the fall of 2019, because it's going to take almost a year to do the citizen engagement, write the OCP, review the OCP, and adopt the OCP through public hearing. And when you start working on your OCP, as a minimum, you should look at boundary extension areas and joint planning with the ACRD. you should look at 70% of your housing stock densification for affordability and attainability in Port Alberni. You should review what sustainable community is and how we get it here. You should take a second look at your 70-acre site on Golden Street, which I think is referred to as Jurassic Park around here. So it's now designated future development. That's going to take a little bit of study to really define what that can and should look like over the next 15 or 20 years. You should review your regional context statement. You should review your climate change policies, which I believe have not been reviewed since 2010. You should review the development performance and revise your population projections from 2006. And remember, when you're dealing with an OCP, you have a 15-year term, but you have a 25-year planning horizon, which is to say you're going to go to your citizens and say, what would you like this place to be like and feel like 25 years from now? Okay. Best practice number 2, council should work towards the goal of having 70% or the majority of its housing stock as attainable housing. 70% may not be the right number. It probably takes a little bit more study. But the point is the majority of your housing stock will be attainable housing. Standalone single-family houses on large lots are the least attainable of all housing types and are not considered to be attainable housing per se. But attainable housing includes triplexes, quadruplexes, townhouses, and condominiums, and single-family houses and two-family houses with mortgage helpers like secondary suites, lane houses, garden houses, carriage houses, and so on. And by the way, when we talk about affordable housing, we mean housing that takes no more than 30% of your gross family income to own or rent. And affordable housing is usually subsumed within and under attainable housing. Number 3, council should be using its land base carefully, sustainably, and with a view to securing the highest tax-based assessment development, all things considered. Multiple family residential buildings yield the highest tax-based assessment value of any residential development. It gives you the biggest bang for your buck. Council should show a preference for well-planned and properly located multi-family residential buildings moving forward. However, if you do this, it will change the shape and form of your community, which is what rebuilding your OCP is all about. You have to address that. Okay? So economic sustainability at City Hall means the ability to pass zero or minimal tax increase budgets each and every year on an ongoing basis. Tax-based profit centers, multiple family residential developments are very useful to help you with economic sustainability at City Hall. And here's what that looks like. Okay, this chart shows the relationship between tax-based profit centers or multifamily residential development and its ability to fund budget increases. So line 0 is your base budget. Line 4, or the blue line, year by year, shows the increases proposed in the budget for that particular year. The green bars are the histograms. They represent the new tax-based assessment that comes into the municipality each and every year. Now, whenever the green bars touch the blue line, that means you're economically sustainable. That means you can adopt an increased budget without increasing the taxes. Okay? Whenever the green line fails to meet the blue line, when there's that white shortfall, that means the only way you can fund your budget increase is by increasing taxes that year. Now, whenever the green bar surpasses the blue line, you actually have the opportunity to do a tax refund if you want, because you actually have more new taxpayers than you need to accommodate the budget increase. So you can spread that new wealth over everybody and actually reduce their taxes for that particular year. So tax-based profit centers, they're very important to economic sustainability at City Hall. you should be going after it as much as you can. Council needs to approve more high ERD value development proposals for Port Alberni, with or without the support of the neighbors. And here's where the values trade-off comes in. Environmentally responsible development, or ERD, usually means multiple family residential developments at medium or higher densities. And the neighbors who may prefer to have lower density residential neighborhood in their city or in their neighborhoods will often oppose such development. And council is faced with trading off values to satisfy diametrically opposed positions. Joe Planner says, yes, recommend approval because it's good city planning. Joe Neighbor says, I don't really like this in my neighborhood. You have to decide. More often than not, you should trade off keeping the neighbors happy in favor of approving ERD developments. That is the higher value, all things considered, and it's the better choice to move Port Alberni forward. Council needs to sponsor and facilitate a conversation or a dialogue about the new city planning in Port Alberni. This is the new city planning paradigm, the new city planning credo, the new city planning approach, the new city plan circa 2019. And we're looking for city planning which promotes ERD as the vehicle to protect our part of the planet, to help our poor, those for whom affordable housing is only a dream and virtually a nightmare. And we're looking for city planning which includes sustainable community, affordable and attainable housing, density and design, and the good city planning sweet spot. We're looking for city planning which addresses how to plan our city in response to climate change. Remember, you haven't looked at that since 2010. And we're looking for city planning which unifies the YIMBYs and the NIMBYs and the taxpayers and the neighbors and council in a common purpose to move Port Alberni forward as a more affordable and attainable community in the next 1,400 days. Council should take the long view and think about our future citizens each and every time they make a decision on a city planning application. Any decision you make will last 70 to 100 years in terms of the building and development that results from that decision. Accordingly, it's not useful to underutilize the land. That's a waste. When you listen to First Nations people talk about land, it goes something like this. The land is given to us by the Creator. We do not own the land, even though we may have title to it. It belongs to our unborn children 7 generations hence. We are to use the land today in consideration of our children tomorrow. Now that's the long view on land use and development, the 70 to 100 year view. Develop the land today such that it utilizes the land fully, completely, carefully, and sustainably, and leads to the proper reuse and redevelopment of the land 7 generations forward. To look at it the other way, don't ever underutilize the land. It's a waste, and it leads to premature urban sprawl into the rural area. Best practice number 7, council should guide city planning and development by using ERD and the new city planning paradigm circa 2019 to protect the planet and help the poor in Port Alberni. And we already know what protecting the planet means here and helping the poor, what that means here. It means using the land properly, and it means looking after affordable housing. Number 8, sweet spot city planning applications deserve to be approved on their own merits, whether the neighbors support them or not. And there's that values trade-off again. Sweet spot city planning applications are consistent with your OCP. They have high ERD values. They exhibit good city planning, urban design, landscape design, form and character principles, and they typically reflect good architecture. They have site and context fit, which means the proposal sits well on the site, relates well to the street and the adjacent properties, and relates well to the blocks surrounding the site. And finally, number 9, council should use best practices in citizen engagement and public participation in city planning and governance. Let's face it, we want to do more citizen engagement. We want to do more public participation, but it has to be purposeful and useful. Otherwise, it'll burn your staff resources and it'll frustrate everybody. So we recommend that you continue to use public hearings to give all interested parties their say in a structured, legal, and open process. And we recommend that you focus any extraordinary citizen engagement on things like the new city planning paradigm or on things like rebuilding the OCP. See, when you go to the citizens and engage them in rebuilding the OCP, that's the best city planning engagement you can ever get, because you're asking them to tell you what their hopes and aspirations are for their city 25 years down the road. When the citizens show up at a public hearing and they engage in city planning, they argue about whether a building is too fat, too short, too tall, too skinny, too ugly, not the right color. That's not the best citizen engagement in city planning. This is. Take seriously your responsibility to govern and resist the urge to share that responsibility through governing by public consensus and opinion. Okay? Continue to use the Advisory Planning Commission model. They're like the Senate in Canada because they're like the chamber of first sober thought. And you know what? If you just look at the history of it, they almost consistently give you really useful planning recommendations. It's a good board, you know, or it's a good commission. And consider devolution to staff of certain authorities, including development permit applications and development variances. But I would say don't do this for at least 18 months. So I want you to play with these development permit applications, play with these development variances and so on, and see what it feels like to you. Remember what George Cuff was saying at our orientation seminar? He said you ought to be dealing with the higher level governance. So if after 18 months this sort of stuff looks like, well, it's just the technical stuff, staff can do it, then devolve it to staff. But don't do that until you've played with it a little bit. So there are a series of recommendations in the next 1,400 days. And in your agenda, there are 2 general recommendations that cover all of this stuff. The first recommendation is that council receive the next 1,400 days full report, executive summary, and briefing notes. And the second recommendation is that council refer the initiatives and recommendations in the next 1,400 days to Strategic Plan 2019 for review and consideration. So that second recommendations includes all of that stuff that you see there on the screen. Okay? Now, is that it? Oh, so there's actually more stuff in the next 1,400 days. There's testing the themes with a sample public hearing and working with trade-offs. So the themes that we have are the growth and development themes, and we have the city planning and governance themes, okay? And we have an actual public hearing that you can play with to sort of work out trading off values and that sort of stuff. And then we can actually evaluate the decision you made. We also have 4 case studies in the next 1,400 days. It includes a sweet spot city planning application, the misguided community association, the tiny house cluster on a demo lot, and bonus density and affordable housing and how that works. And so we could go through all of that, but I don't recommend we do that today. I recommend that you find a time between now and perhaps the start of your strategic planning where you can take a morning and an afternoon and workshop this stuff. Workshop it in sort of a workshop environment, not in a normal decision-making environment. And you can just see what it feels like to do these trade-offs and why you should be making the trade-offs in the first place. So in closing, I'm not from here. And when I got here, I started walking around. I walked Argyle Street, 3rd Avenue, Harbor Quay, Somas Mill, all over. And it reminded me of the first thing I ever learned about city planning. And I learned it from Professor Jim Wilson. And he always said, walk the site before you plan the site. Or the other way is, walk the land before you plan the land. And this was before there was Google Map. So walking the site actually meant 2 feet and a heartbeat, a sketch pad, a pen, and you go out and you record what you see and come back and report. And on my first Friday here, Tim and I were walking the land, so to speak. And we noticed the empty storefronts, the street furniture, the wide sidewalks, the even wider streets, the Somas Mill Straight, and Tyee Landing. And Tim would say, what would you do about this? And how did that get there? And how would you fix that? And do you see a problem here? I have 3 days on the ground and he's pumping me hard already, right? We are so solutions oriented. And it reminded me of the second thing I ever learned in city planning, which I learned from Professor Bob Dorney. He said, you never have to compromise good city planning principles as long as you are prepared to negotiate or trade off the ways and means by which the principles are achieved. I'm going to try that one more time. You never have to compromise good city planning principles as long as you are prepared to negotiate or trade off the ways and means by which the principles are achieved. So he was actually saying two things. Number one, he was saying there's more than one way to solve a problem, which I have found comforting ever since. And number two, he's saying this city planning stuff, it requires trade-offs all the time. And you know why? Because not everybody wants the same thing when it comes to city planning. By the way, Bob Dorney smokes cigars. Over the days and weeks, I kept walking and driving and observing and feeling and thinking and recording. Now, one morning in December, as I was heading into Southport, through Northport and Johnson Road East and Redford, it struck me. PA is a multinodal city. And it reminded me of the third thing I ever learned about city planning, which I learned from Professor Robert Preston, who taught central place theory. And I still have his textbook. Cities come in many shapes, sizes, and natures. There are hamlets and villages and towns and uni-centered cities and duo-centered cities and multi-centered or multinodal cities, metropolises, conurbations, megalopolises, and so on. PA is multinodal by nature. Multinodal is your identity. It's your diversity. It's your opportunity as a city. It's your greatest asset. It's your competitive edge when you compete for growth and development with other municipalities on this island. Another great asset is your staff. And yet another great asset is this mayor and this council. You are starting with a clean slate. You can make whatever decisions you want. You are bound neither by precedent nor by past decisions. You are free to build and move Port Alberni forward in the next 1,400 days, and I so recommend, Madam.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that presentation. I'm assuming council probably has questions or comments, so I'll open it up to council. Councillor Haggard.
I have a question and a comment. I was walking my granddog at Westport Place this morning. What do you think of that development? Because it's kind of got a mix of condos, duplexes, and single-family developments. Or would you prefer something higher than 2 stories?
See, it's kind of site-specific on something like that, okay? So there's nothing wrong with sort of mixing your densities using a similar building form. But there's also nothing wrong with mixing your densities using different building forms. For example, if you look at Anderson Hill or District out on Bird Street, by the time that's developed, there's going to be a range of single-family houses and duplexes and triplexes and townhouses and 4-story condos, or maybe even more than 4 stories. So they both work. It all depends where it is and so on. I like Westport the way it is. That's fine. Yep.
Okay, thank you. And my comment is, when you were talking about attainable housing, having secondary suites and lanewide houses, my thought was, yes, we need attainable housing, but I think as the baby boomers start to age, and we're all getting older except for me and Ron,
Yeah.
but that's going to be a real need in every community to live with their sons or daughters. So it might be a way to promote it for multi-generational living, not
Yeah.
just attainable housing.
Yeah,
That was
I
my
think-
thought when I read your report.
So that's a very important concept, and if you read several OCPs around here, they do have the concept called living in place, which is the whole notion that as you get older, you can still stay in the same neighborhood if you convert your house somehow, you know, to like from one unit to two units or whatever. And the whole thing of extended family and multi-generational living, that was really popular when I was a kid in the 60s and that. My grandparents lived in the same house I grew up in. Well, it's becoming popular again, you know. So I think we should look for ways to allow people here to live in place, whether it's through secondary suites or garden suites. The other thing that's happening with the baby boomers is that I live in a two-unit house now. I have a multi-generational house now. I have a legal, that's two words, I have a legal secondary suite in my house at 3130 Frechette Street. And my 92-year-old mother-in-law, Mary, lives there with us, you know. But eventually, Heather and I are going to say, you know what? This garden is getting too big. I don't want to cut another blade of grass. And a 1,500 square foot condo, one level, is looking really good for me. So I think the other thing you should be looking at in terms of attainable housing is showing a preference for condominiums and townhouses, medium density and higher density, moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you for your report, Joe. It's a good read and some pretty interesting ideas. But you didn't talk a lot about industrial lands. I know you talked a bit about the Somas Mill site,
Yeah.
but do you have any thoughts on industrial lands? This valley is sadly lacking.
Yeah, and you know what? The economy of the planet is changing, and industry is not what it used to be, and yet it's still a vital component of our local economy. And I think there are several vital components of our local economy. There's people that come and move here, and they carry their jobs in their pocket in one of these, you know. But there's nothing wrong with having another lumber plant, if another dimensional lumber plant if we can get that, or another heavy industry if we can get that. I think you can have a balance of all sorts of uses in this city. The thing about heavy industry these days, they're not the polluters they once were. They operate under huge regulations, huge environmental regulations. So I can easily see an office and a home-based occupation economy living side by side with a heavy industry economy, living with a retail economy, living with a light industry economy, and so on. I chose not to address industrial land per se because I think it's something that your economic development officer is trying to address on an ongoing basis. But in terms of how you change your OCP, I think the direction you ought to be going there is with residential densification. That's your biggest bang for your buck moving forward, in my opinion.
Councillor Paulson.
Joe, what a great report.
Thank you.
And I did read it. There's a lot to digest. There's a lot that
Yeah.
is over my head. And I'm looking forward to a workshop where we can work through terminology and stuff. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but just one thing that jumped into my mind, and we're talking about carriage houses and suites and those sorts of things. And I'd just like to get your thoughts on when you go 2 or 3 generations down the road, or 4 or 5 generations in areas that you've designated for that type of building, how do you, and I mean this is visioning that we need to do, but how do you keep that from becoming a ghetto?
Well,
25 years down the road,
Yeah.
or
That's
people move on
Yeah.
and new people move in and they don't care about upkeep and those sorts of things.
So that's a very intelligent and insightful question. And the first thing, you do have a minimum maintenance and occupancy bylaw in this city, which means you're supposed to keep your yard looking a certain way, and and that sort of stuff. But I think what you do when you revise your zoning bylaw to provide for carriage houses or garden suites or secondary suites and so on, you should have minimum standards there, minimum standards in terms of size and quality of construction and so on. That will go a long way to kind of doing the other thing. Another opportunity you might have here is there's probably several illegal secondary suites. And you might want to figure out a way to legalize those, you know, because they still provide housing for somebody, you know. And again, you might want to look at regulations or approaches to helping those suites become legalized one way or another. And when you do that, you have to pay particular attention to the BC Building Code, okay? Because you don't want suites that are unsafe or that don't have a window big enough to crawl out of in a fire and so on, you know? But I think if you kind of look at that and blend them too, you probably should be okay 25 years down the road. So that would be my recommendation. Think about the standards you want to put in your zoning bylaw to provide these suites to be really good quality suites, one way or another, you know.
Councillor Washington, do you have any comments? Okay. Councillor Poon? Okay. Councillor Paulson?
This is probably all stuff we could talk about in workshop, but as we know, there's a fair jag of affordable housing going to be coming on the market here very, very soon, in the next few months or within the next couple of years. And I guess we need to do an inventory of that. And when you talk about your 70% ratio, we need to take into consideration what's currently on the go. I mean, I can think of over 100 units are probably going to come on board here in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And with regards to overall community need, how far do those 100 units take us to that 70% figure? And I think we need to get a handle on that as well.
Yep, I agree. You need to do a little bit of research and studying on that to figure out what the demand is and then what the supply is and see if the two meet. And if they don't, you're going to work on more supply or less supply, depending on the demand. Yeah, that's quite important. Yeah, I agree.
And I think I would I think it's important to clarify the difference between attainable housing and affordable housing. And I think a lot of this is based around attainable housing, which I think affordable housing is a piece of that.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah, but not necessarily, when we think about affordable housing, we think about people living below the poverty line who need that affordable housing to have somewhere where they're able to live. I think this also, to me at least, speaks to, my generation of people who want to be able to own homes one day.
Yep.
And making sure that housing is attainable for them. So not just people who are struggling, but kind of the more middle income people as well, and being conscious of that, looking at the whole community impact. So not just the affordable piece, that's an important piece of it.
Yeah, I think you have to look at affordable housing as a subset of attainable housing in general. And then attainable housing, the whole notion there is we're trying to figure out how to create housing that is accessible or attainable by a bigger part of the population. The single family house on a large lot, that's attainable by it's attainable by some, but not by many, because by their nature, they are the most expensive piece of real estate, bar none. Whereas if you have a single family house with a secondary suite or a garden suite or a carriage house, that's called a mortgage helper, you know? So there's gonna be more people who can actually buy that house because of the mortgage helper. It's the mortgage helper that makes that single family house attainable. Now, the thing about affordable housing is that almost always it is subsidized housing, which means somebody has to put cash into the development in order to make it work. And that's why BC Housing funds these things all the time. Sometimes you can get the developer to build affordable housing, but only if he gets bonus density on his project, which makes it feasible. Because he has extra units, it makes it feasible for him to actually build this affordable housing and run it as affordable housing without going broke. Otherwise, it has to be subsidized by the province. But yeah, the most important point here is affordable housing is a subset of attainable housing. Okay?
So I have a few questions. You've mentioned a few times that we need to show a preference for density. So how do we show a preference? Is that just a piece of our OCP, or are there other ways that we can show a preference for density?
Well, it's actually two ways. First of all, you have to write it into your OCP. So you know that the picture of future Alberni includes 70% attainable housing, and the biggest part of that 70% is probably not going to be single families with mortgage helpers. It'll be townhouses, triplexes, fourplexes, condos, and so on. So you actually write that into your OCP. But as I said earlier, when you do that, that actually changes the shape and form of your municipality. So whereas today you're predominantly a single-family municipality, traditionally a single-family municipality, 25 years from now, if you go down this route, that'll look different and it'll feel different, and that's not necessarily bad. You have to want it, and if you want it, you have to write it into your OCP. Now, the other way you get this is that, so when you have an application for a multifamily residential development, and the planner says, this is a sweet spot development, it's consistent with the OCP, it has high ERD values, it has good city planning principles, urban design principles, it has site and context fit, you approve that, whether the neighbors want it or not. Now, that's where the values trade-off comes in. Now, the other part of that, though, is that, remember I told you, you need to be talking about the new city planning in Port Alberni. The whole idea behind that is to work with your citizens and say, we think we want to go into a direction of medium-density residential in the future. How do you feel about that as a shape and form of your future city? So the idea is to try and build the neighbors in on that. So when you go to public hearings on this stuff, you might get more support than resistance, you know? And that's going to take dialogue and citizen engagement and all that kind of stuff, which is what you're going to be doing when you update your OCP anyways. So
I think that kind of leads into my next question. How do we determine when it's a good fit for a neighborhood to increase the density? So, you know, when does a 4-story apartment building fit into a currently single-family neighborhood?
Well,
because we're
yeah.
a community that doesn't have a lot of multifamily buildings.
No, that's right.
So adding them in, unless we're adding them when they are where they already are, which of course makes sense. But
Yeah.
how do we expand beyond that, and how do we determine when it's a good fit?
So I would work on the notion of nodes in the city, like multi-nodal municipality, but I would start with the downtown. I would say putting your multifamily, 4 stories, 5 stories, 7 stories, in a downtown and moving out of the downtown in just about any direction is a good fit already, because you want multifamily residential in the downtown as the eyes for your main street, as a support for your downtown. So that's target number 1. Target number 2 are places like 5535 Cherry Creek Road, you know, Cherry Creek, yeah. That 17-acre site is kind of interesting because it's almost on the highway. You've got commercial and office uses in front of it. You have all sorts of retail services in front of it, you know. If you're gonna have a high-density neighborhood anywhere in your city, wouldn't you put it right there? Where there's access to the highway, you know, like easy transportation, access to transit, and access to all of these retail services and office services. It seems like a natural fit. Now that becomes a high-density node in your municipality over the long term. Then when you're talking about the medium-density stuff, the 7-story stuff, let's say that I was talking about, you might want to look throughout your city and throughout your neighborhoods and see if you can find naturally occurring nodes. These might be like major intersections, which kind of fit the notion of medium density, you know? So that's how I would do it. It is going to take some study. It doesn't just come like that. Well, with the exception of the 17 acres and the downtown, which is a natural as far as I'm concerned, you're going to have to do some thinking about where it ought to go in the future. And that's what part of the OCP rebuild is about too, you know, doing that thinking.
I think that's very helpful because kind of looking at it in that way, I think there's definitely a fear that, you know, we're going to take all of our currently single-family home neighborhoods and drop apartment buildings down. And it doesn't really feel like that makes sense. But there certainly are areas, certainly it makes sense to put suites in those homes, to build townhomes, that kind of thing. But I like the approach of looking for natural fits and seeing where we can expand on that. Certainly there's no argument that it makes sense taxation-wise to focus on higher density. You know, we have a lot of needs as a community, and certainly need to be considering how we're going to meet those needs going forward, as infrastructure needs more maintenance and renewal, and the costs only go up. So
That's right.
and then I think my last question is, you mentioned, I think, like pre-zoning or kind of blanket zoning areas. Can you elaborate more on that process?
Yeah, pre-zoning is when, now again, you want to designate in your OCP first, okay? But as a means of encouraging development, let's say, in accordance with your OCP or consistent with your OCP, you might want to pre-zone the lands that you designate for multifamily, which may be zoned RS1, single family right now. You might want to pre-zone those lands for multifamily. As a municipality, you take the initiative to pre-zone those lands. Once the lands are pre-zoned, it's pretty easy to market the lands for the intended ultimate use, you know? Now, pre-zoning and blanket zoning, not quite exactly the same thing. I'm talking about be a little more strategic. Certainly if you have sites that you want to market for affordable housing, let's say, I think you should pre-zone those like right away, you know. It's also my opinion, and this is a little tricky because you're working with the Agricultural Land Commission, but remember, you are a local municipality. Yes, we are creatures of the province, but we have self-determination, which means we can decide how we're going to use our land. You know, that's our obligation. That's our responsibility. So part of the technique I might recommend to your staff with respect to the 17 acres out on the highway is pre-zone that for high-density residential, and then go to the ALC and say, hey, we want to get this out of here because this is where we want our high-density residential neighborhood to be in the future. And by the way, here's our 17 acres outside the boundary that we're going to annex into the city. So please remove the ALR designation. I'd be inclined to take that approach as opposed to coming in and saying, oh, please, can I take you? Because you know what? Sometimes forgiveness is a lot easier than permission, you know? So I would definitely, I'd recommend the first approach.
Okay. Councillor Paulson.
Me again.
That's fine. We have time. So.
Yes, I see that. Just a comment. First of all, with regards to the need for affordable housing, the people that need affordable housing, that definition is changing. And I consider myself and my wife in the future will be people that depend on affordable housing because both of us only qualify for Canada Pension Plan and old age pension. There are people in the community that supplement that with a teacher's pension or so on. The other one that kind of shocked me, and there was an analogy when we were talking with BC Housing, is you know who's looking for affordable housing is that guy working at the paper mill. So he's a single income guy with a wife and 3 kids. And that's a guy that probably cannot afford more than $1,000, either in mortgage or in rent. That's a person who is looking for affordable housing. So there's a different dynamic, and I think the cost of living kind of has changed that single guy working in the paper mill, he also better have his wife working too in order to go there. And my second question is, and Joe, this is probably not directed towards you, but in our last council, we had presentations with regards to the Social Planning Commission idea. And I'm just kind of curious where that process is at. And but that's something that we can bring back at a later time, maybe.
Well, we're kind of working on the report, but it's not there yet.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
No, just
I mean,
kind of curious.
we're certainly looking at the strategy, which is to say we're thinking about, well, if we had a social planning commission, what would it actually do? And I'm suggesting, well, some of the things I said it should do is probably what it would actually do. And then if we had one, who would it report to? And how would you actually support it? Are you gonna be having staff support the social planning commission? And do you have to finance it somehow? So we have to kind of figure all that out. And then what is the reporting relationship? Do they report to you or do you report to them? And so on. So we're trying to work out all those details, and once we get that, I'm pretty sure we'll have a report. for your
There's a couple other
consideration.
committees that are kind of ad hoc committees that I think are waiting to see where we land with that.
Yeah,
And then those committees might
Yeah.
report to the social planning commission.
yeah, that's a
commission
possibility
as
too.
well. Yeah, for sure.
So we haven't worked out the model yet,
Okay.
we're still thinking
Well,
about that.
get busy, will
Oh,
you?
yeah,
Come
of
on.
course.
Okay. Counselors, has that brought up any other questions? Nothing. Okay. Are there any questions from any members of the public? Questions or comments? Nothing? Do you want to come up and say that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so seeing no other comments, we will declare a recess, and the next portion of our meeting, oh, yes, okay, we have to receive. Okay, would somebody like to make the two motions? Yeah, Davina says we can.
You're going to be
written on
receiving
there.
the information, and the recommendation is to refer everything to strategic planning. So you're not making any decisions, you're referring it to further consideration.
Go ahead.
I'm in for that. That the next 1,400 days, full report, executive summary, briefing notes, and transmittal report prepared by the consulting city planner be received.
Is there a seconder? Second, all in favor? Carried.
And that the committee of the whole refer the initiatives and recommendations in the next 1,400 days to Strategic Plan 2019 for review and consideration.
Is there a seconder? Are there any questions, comments? All in favor? Carried. With that done, thank you very much, Mr. Kalenda, for presenting to us and for taking the time to put the report together. I think it's a great start to our strategic planning process and to the meeting we're having this afternoon also. So we'll have our recess now, and our next meeting will begin at 4 p.m. in this room. Okay. Welcome to our somewhat smaller than we expected crowd. So we are already partway through our committee of the whole meeting, and we've just finished our recess, and now we are ready for the second part, which is the Harborview Lands, which will be led by our Economic Development Manager and Manager of Planning. Come on up.
Hello, okay. I don't know why I always check this, but thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the Harborview Lands and set the, can I work this? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yep, set the context from a planning perspective. So the things I'm gonna chat with you about today are the properties at a high level, looking at the location and servicing, and a bit about the surrounding area. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fun stuff, the planning stuff, the permitted land use, looking at our OCP, our zoning bylaw, and the development permit area that it's in. And then I'm going to close a little bit with the planning and development process, what could happen moving forward if council were to decide a certain route. So the properties that we're looking at here, the Harborview Lands, are actually two legal parcels. 5350 Argyle Street and 3050 Kingsway Avenue. Together they are about 2.166 acres of land. Right now they consist of a gravel parking lot, a grass and treed area, and a public lane. With regards to servicing, there's BC Hydro, Telus, and cable lines located in the lane, but no municipal services hooking up to the property at the current moment. This map here provides a kind of high-level overview of where the subject properties are within the context of the city of Port Alberni. You can see that they're located along the waterfront, more or less in the south portion of the city. This is a topographical map zoomed in on the two properties. You can see that the properties do slope a little bit to the north, with the greatest slope being around the northwest corner of 5350 Argyle. Overall, though, it's a relatively steady grade. So if we think about the surrounding area, we can see that these two properties are situated within a mix, kind of a mixed area. You have a bunch of commercial, light industrial, tourist, and residential uses in the area. Some of the prominent features nearby include the Harbor Quay Marina, Uptown Business District, and Gyro Park being not too far away. There are two main arterial roads nearby, which include Argyle Street and 3rd Avenue. And this map just kind of provides, or this image provides a bit of an aerial view of the locational relationship between the Harborview Lands and some of those key assets in the nearby area. So, getting to the fun stuff, the planning stuff, if we look into the official community plan, which, as Joe just previously mentioned, is that overarching policy guide for our city and a best predictor of future growth, we can see that there's a couple different things in there. Right now, the designation for future use of those lands is GCO, General Commercial. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. The zoning bylaw, they're zoned as C7, core business, and they're also within a development permit area number 2, which is commercial. So I'll talk about all those in just a second here. This is a land use map of our OCP designations. So you can see that there's a lot of general commercial being the red. You do have some multifamily residential and some residential nearby, so I think it would be important to think about the sensitivities of how any future development on this site would interact with those residential uses as well. But overall, a lot of other general commercial in the nearby area. So the purpose of general commercial as a land use designation is really to permit for a wide range of uses, including retail, office, entertainment, food and beverage, and mixed commercial and residential. The underlying purpose of that is really to maximize the economic and social vitality of these areas, recognizing that they're kind of in key locations within the city that have a specific type of potential. The OCP states that any associated development within a general commercial area really should provide an enhanced pedestrian experience to promote non-vehicle shopping trips. So really getting people walking, cycling, rolling, anything kind of out of their car as much as possible to create that vibrant space in a commercial area. So now moving over to our zoning bylaw, which regulates how land, buildings, and structures might be constructed and used. We can see that the properties are currently zoned as C7 core business, and the purpose of this zone is really to establish and maintain that vibrant mixed-use commercial core area, providing goods and services to residents, the traveling public, and tourists. Within the C7, there's actually quite a large number of permitted principal uses, so I've just highlighted a short list of them here. Those are all accessible online if anyone's interested in reading the full robust list. There's only a couple accessory uses being home occupation, residential, and commercial. I've highlighted a couple here that I think might be particularly relevant and appropriate from just a quick planning analysis of what's happening in the area and what might help create a vibrant downtown core. Thinking like artist studio, bakery, community care facility, live work, medical services, multiple family dwellings, public market, restaurants, retail, senior housing, tourist services. Those are all some that I thought, just from my own personal perspective, would be exciting for the area, but there's a whole bunch of other permitted principal uses. Another couple of things that I want to highlight within this zone is that the maximum coverage is 90%. So that's how much of the site could be covered, meaning that 10% would have to remain open, usable space. The maximum maximum height of the principal building is 14 meters, or about 4 stories, but there is a density bonusing policy in place for any mixed-use residential and commercial developments in a C7 core business zone. So that could, based on if certain things were achieved within the development, whether it's accessible housing or underground parking or something like that, then sometimes we can negotiate with a developer density bonusing. So now moving on to the development permit area, which is designated commercial for these two properties. The purpose of the commercial development permit area is to ensure a high quality development in this area where it's very highly visible for the city. So any proposed building in a development permit area has to acquire a specific development permit, working with the city planning department, coming to council to get approval for their building. What this regulates is that we have discussions about scale, form, and character of the building, as well as conversations about signage, landscaping, and parking. So really we get to have a little bit more say in just negotiating and discussing what the actual building looks like and ensuring that it's a high quality building for the community. Now, finally moving on to the planning and development process. So this is kind of looking forward to the future. If mayor and council decide to move forward with something being developed on this site, there's a couple of different options that can play out. Some that I've just highlighted here, including a rezoning and OCP amendment. Now this would only be if the proponent or the city wanted to actually change the zoning. As I mentioned, there's a lot of permitted uses in C7, so it might be appropriate as is, and this part would not necessarily be required. But if we were to do a rezoning and OCP amendment, there's a couple steps along the way. So any proponent would have to submit an application to the planning department, which we would review, make recommendations to the Advisory Planning Commission based on our assessment of that application. The Advisory Planning Commission would then review and make a recommendation to council. Council would then either accept or reject, and if they allowed it to move forward, it would go through first and second reading, public hearing for public input, third and fourth reading before adoption or rejection. So that's just the rezoning and OCP amendment process. It would be the same if there was a text amendment where we were adding a use into the C7 zone. The development permit process, which I just kind of highlighted, really it's about the planning department working with the developer to achieve specific goals and to review their plans to make sure that they meet the needs of that area and that we're getting a high quality development for that area. But again, any development permit currently comes through the planning department and to council directly for approval, either or for to be sent back if they require any changes to be made. And then finally, the building permit process is a standard process for ending new buildings, just to ensure that our buildings are up to BC Building Code, meeting safety regulations, so on and so forth. But that's kind of some of the process that might be entailed if we were to move forward. So other than that, I will leave this up on the screen for a moment. I think this is really important. Obviously, we're here today at the Committee of the Whole to listen to the public, but we're also having an online public engagement discussion right now through our Let's Connect PA. platform. So there's a survey there. There's an ideas form where people can just quickly submit ideas. That's going to be open until March 5th. We welcome anyone's input. Look forward to reading through them all and providing a summary report back to council on March 11th. So please feel free to submit your comments, tell your friends and family, and get them involved regardless of what your opinion is. We want to hear from you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think for the Let's Connect PA, it's also a good reminder for people to sign up for it, to register so that they get the emails when they come out. I've had a lot of really positive feedback on the information that went out, so great work too. I know you and our manager of communications handled that. Council, any questions? Councillor Washington?
Thank you. Have we got any idea what came in through the Let's Connect? Is it good, bad, other, all of the above?
Any hint?
Yep. I've had a bit of, I've done a little bit of a preliminary scan. I think we've had over 40 responses come in so far, which is a pretty good start for just being open for a couple of days. Fairly positive comments, lots of diverse opinions in terms of the types of use that people would be interested in, lots of open-ended comments with people kind of expressing their experiences and their feelings about the site. But so far, fairly positive. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Corbeil?
Just a quick question. It appears that there's a sort of a triangular lot just south of that. Do we kind of isolate that lot if after development? You know the lot I'm referring to?
I think I know the one. It's kind of like a very tiny little
Yeah.
one. That's a good question. You know what? I haven't had any discussions about that yet. I think that's something that would be worth. Yeah, that it's kind of the little.
That's on.
Oh,
You
you're.
can get to that from Kingsway, can you not?
Oh, sorry. I was thinking.
No,
Oh, no,
unless there's
yeah.
a back alley there or something, right? This lot here I'm referring to.
I think there's only residences there.
Oh, yeah.
I don't believe that property is city owned.
No, I don't think
Yeah.
so.
I think that might be Western.
Just
Maybe
something to
CAO?
think about. It could isolate that piece of property somehow.
Madam Mayor, we believe that to be privately owned. We've spoken to the owner in the past, and he's expressed his interest in some of our lands. And that lot may be accessed through a vacant lot between houses, but we'll confirm that before we move any further.
Thank you. Councillor Poon, do you have any questions or comments? Okay. Councillor Paulson?
No, I'm good. Yeah, that's,
All right.
we know what we can do there, and we know what we can do there as opposed to the official community plan, and yeah, so I think we need to have this discussion moving forward about what can or can't be done there, whether we do something or we don't.
Lovely.
Is that a yes or no?
That's a wait. I'm waiting for Mr. Deacon.
We're not sure what that was.
This deals with the legal stuff.
That's right. Councillor Haggard, any questions or comments?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the presentation and for the background information. Mr. Deacon. I don't want to say the fun stuff, because not that planning isn't fun, but
Madam Mayor and councillors, thanks for the opportunity to talk about Harborview Lands. Arguably, it's the best development site that is owned by the city, given its views, its location, the height above water, and the trees. And past councils have looked at this property and have always envisioned a marquee development of some sort if it were to be developed. So, and I'm the development guy, so I'm here and I'm going to provide you a brief history of what the city has attempted to do with the property. In 2005, The city issued an RFP that netted 6 responses. Most were for mixed-use, commercial residential buildings and included public amenities. Most envisioned 2 or 3 buildings on the site. A couple of them had envisioned up to 200 units on the site. Now, we are talking 2005. One was a seniors project. Another had a pub on one end of the project. And the offers for the property at that time ranged between $310,000 and $510,000. The sale was halted because of pushback by residents on what they viewed as parkland, even though, as you've already heard, it's designated general commercial and with a specific zoning of C7. The process did result in some developer anger about the time and the money that they had invested in the process. I was going to bring a couple of examples of the work that they had done, and then I decided, A, I don't have their permission to do it, and that I didn't want to prejudice the current process. So in 2007, there was an uptown and waterfront redevelopment study that envisioned connecting Harborview Lands with an overhead walkway down to the Water Street Wharf and marina down there, and a boutique hotel on the edge of the Harbor Key property. And again, that report suggested that the site could easily accommodate up to 200 units of residential. Did include a walkway. I think all of the proposals that we received were sensitive to the notion that they would need to provide public amenities and retain some of the trees on the property. I'm not entirely certain why the recommendation was never implemented. Council at the time, so it was just 2 years after the 2005 process, so I think the council of the day was a bit gun-shy about going forward. I think that there were also emerging some concerns about the Port Alberni economy, and then of course in 2008 the economy collapsed worldwide, and lots of projects that were being proposed were put on hold. In 2013, we issued, the council of the day was ready to receive some proposals for the area, held a couple of council meetings at which the RFP was discussed, and basically the citizen input at that time was retain some of the trees. That RFP did not get any responses. A newspaper story on the fact that it didn't get any responses netted 2 proposals, neither of which obviously were realized. And then in 2016, we had an unsolicited offer for the property. The project was ground floor commercial, 3 floors of seniors care, and then floors above that were either strata condo and or boutique hotel in some kind of an arrangement. And the project collapsed when Island Health refused to guarantee beds, seniors beds for it. So that's the history of the property. And the reason it's back on the table is because a few developers in the last few months have asked if the city was interested in selling the parcel, and we decided, with the guidance of the CAO, that it was much better to have a full public process than to go ahead, issue an RFP, see what we got, only to have us run into issues with either the community or the property itself or others. So that's why we're here at this time.
Thank you. Council, are there any questions or comments? Councillor Washington?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When you say the parcel, are you talking Kingsway Avenue or are you talking the Argyle Street property, or both?
I'm talking both.
Both.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Councillor Haggard?
Can you say what kind of development these developers are interested in doing, or is it too premature to talk about it?
It's a bit premature, but I think it's safe to say that mixed-use commercial residential with an emphasis on the residential, given developers' belief in our knowledge that we've got a surplus of commercial properties in the community at the moment. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Paulson?
Well, I remember, I don't know if it was 2005 or 2013, I attended a public hearing in the Capitol Theatre, and I was probably one of the only people in there that was kind of open to developing the property that was in that building at that time. And I just make comment that, and I think I did at that time, but I worked in a commercial venture, kitty corner of the park, for over 10 years. I shouldn't be calling it a park, right? Because it's not zoned a park. Sorry. But my view of that empty lot was certainly different than many people that presented at that time. And I believe in the trees and stuff, but I also believe in, and I think it was mentioned in our previous, if there is some form of development, and I don't know how big or how small it should be, but it does present eyes on the area, and I kind of had a vision for that, and I went through the development of the Harbor Key those times and stuff, and there was a vision for accommodation, for that area in the original Harbor Key plans. And boy, I'm starting to age myself here. But I guess I'm kind of rambling, but like I say, my view of that park after being in that sporting goods store for over 10 years on the corner, we saw a lot of stuff there that was not good for the community, and it was not good for the image of the area that went on in that treed area. I believe in keeping the trees, and any developer, I'm sure, would look at that and say, you know what, this is great for any development. But I think really where we're at now, and as you alluded to, we want to find out what the public's view is and what could or couldn't be done there. I go back to, I remember when the old cadet hall was up there. It was torn down. I think it was on the back corner of the lot there. Now I'm really aging myself, right? But I just hope that people keep an open mind and they don't slam the door, and that we as a council and our general public keep an open mind and be visionary, and let's see what comes out of this.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil, any questions? Councillor Poon?
Just a comment, I guess. I'd like to see some development there, but I'm open to hearing what everyone has to say, and I look forward to hearing all that.
That's great. Thank you. I just want to follow up on Mr. Deacon, your comment about there was some developer anger. And I think that that really is the point of why we're here today, is we wanted to make sure if we put out an RFP that we are serious about selling or doing something, developing that property. So we wanted the opportunity to hear from the public before we make the decision on whether or not to proceed. So thanks for giving the background on that. And before we open it up to public input, I'm wondering if the CAO could just give a little bit of information on the process on First Nations engagement on this as well. That was a point that was brought up on social media, and just want to talk about how we're engaging First Nations.
Sure, Madam Mayor. I think 2 weeks ago, Councillor Poon and I met with Sashot First Nation. They have previously expressed an interest in these lands, and so the city has previously told them that we will not proceed with considering development without engaging them first. So we've done that. We've reached out and told them that council will be doing this, taking public input, and invited the Sashot to provide council direct to council, so their input on those lands outside of this public engagement process. So I hope that answers your question. And it was in response to their previous expressions of interest in this land.
Okay, thank you. So with that, the purpose of a committee of the whole meeting really is to hear from the community, or that's a big portion of it. So we would welcome anybody who wants to come up and give us input. Who would like to come first? Everybody's here to speak, I assume.
I would assume so.
Mr. McRae? Okay, come on up. Jim? Yeah. So when you come up, if you could just state your name and address for the record. Sorry to make you walk up here today.
Oh, okay. Jim Del Rio, 2871 First Avenue. It's not too often I wake up in the morning and listen to the news and I go, yeah. And when it was on the news this morning about developing that property, it was a yeah. You know, I think it's wonderful, because it's what you were saying, Ron. It's not the best things go up on that parking lot. The only time I ever see it ever used as, say, a park is when car shows on. People sit on the hill to watch the cars go by. Other than that, it's kind of like, I know the last time the people were against it, but they were also against the one in Westport where they're putting up the Rainbow Gardens. You know, that's a playground. I mean, I drive around, I see a lot of things. I never saw anybody in that playground. I saw a lot of dogs taking a poop. You know, and I feeling that that's probably what's going on that one. So I thought it was right on, and like people are so narrow-minded, sometimes they think, well, somebody's gonna come in there and cut all those trees down. They're not gonna do that. They're gonna have to move some, you know, for development, but I think it's, you want the cruise ships to come in, and if they're coming down the harbor and they look up on the hill and there's some pretty high-end, beautiful place up there, that's a pretty good eye-opener. You know, like, wow, this is beautiful. Because I know when you come down 4th or on Highway 4, or you take the cutoff, you run into auto wreckers, and you know, it's not the greatest greeting to Port Alberni. So I was really glad when I heard it, because to me it's I watch what goes on council here, and for the last few councils it's been something everybody's wanted to stay away from. Yet the public are saying, well, we have to develop our waterfront. Well, that is part of our waterfront, and it's beautiful. And I always think, too, if the city is thinking as a council of looking at selling some of your assets off to produce tax dollars, that's a positive. You know, every taxpayer in town should be happy. You know, not, oh, we sat under that tree, or I got engaged under that tree. Well, then buy the tree and take it home. You know, so I think it's great. I was really happy. Like I say, it's not too, I mean, I heard about the LNG plant. To me, that was a foregone conclusion at now, with the price of oil doing what it was, you know, but it was a nice thought, you know. But we have other things going on in town here too, that, like, you know, like the Sand Group, what they're doing. You know, we got that one up at Fairway. I don't know where that's sitting at. You know, there's a lot of things happening, but that would be perfect for tourism, whether it's for aging people living there or whatever, and commercial on the bottom. It's a win-win for everybody. And the land would get used. Now it's just a parking lot for dogs to poop on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Come on up, Mr. McCrae. And I'm sorry, I forgot to recognize we had Freeman of the City, Ken McCrae, in the room.
Ken McCrae, 4121 Butte Street. So that was quite exciting times in 2005 when I was mayor. It had to do with that Capitol Theater, I think, when we had the big meeting. I think that turned people on. Because I remember when I was president of labor in this community, the first meeting we ever had with McMillan Boudel jointly, we had it in the Capitol Theater. It was just about a riot in there. So it was unbelievable. So when we had that meeting in the Capitol Theater, there were so many people, I don't think there's any room for people to stand. So, you know, but it was a different time too. You know, times are completely different then. At that time too, First Nations had very little say in what happened in our community. But now they have a lot of say in what happens to our community. You know, being vice chairman of the Port Authority too, there's lots that we can do with joining together and make it so it's a perfect spot. It's probably one of the best places in our community. You know, if you stand up there, you see what a beautiful sight it is. You know, you talk about the Navy Cadet Hall. When we were kids, we used to ride our bikes from Alberni to Port Alberni, so that was a big thing, and we'd take them up to there because we could watch a big beehive burner down below there where Tassos had their sawmill. It was a complete disaster, but as kids, we thought it was pretty funny. You know, we thought it was an interesting thing. So we've come a long way from them, and we can come a long way now. You only get one chance, so don't spoil it.
Thank you very much. Who would like to come up next? Penny, come on up.
Thank you. Thanks for making this a public process, number one. I own, with my husband and a couple other partners, lot number 1 right there on the corner of Kingsway and Argyle Street. So this is very close to my investment in Port Alberni. So having it developed properly is very important to the existence of my building. And my tenants are very interested. They will be, and I'm sure that they don't even realize that this process is going on yet. But the Carmore block has been one of the key buildings in Port Alberni that has been used as a model in the past for the way that they'd like to see the city developed. They used our building architecture and try to implement it throughout the city. Our building is 1912, so was the first privately owned historic building in Port Alberni. It is a heritage site. With that in mind, it's part of the history piece at the quay with the train station right across the street. It has a definite flavor to that whole corner area going onto the harbor quay. I think that because I've owned that for over 30 years, I've seen what's happened in that area. There is a lot of families and kids that come and play on that hill. In the summer and through the fall, there's a lot of people that do bring their dogs there, but it is a great place to have your dogs run. It's safe. What I would like to see is the bank going down to the industrial road. I'd like to see that cleared off. I think that there's a lot of brush there that helps hide those negative influences where people come and hang about where they shouldn't be. I know that my tenants, whenever they've seen a problem, have called the RCMP, and they've been there right pronto and cleaned it up. There's a line that goes right through dividing those two pieces of property. There's also another one that comes in off of Kingsway. We bought a piece of property at the back of our building to add on for parking for our tenants. And we were instrumental in getting that alleyway put in there, and we had to pave it. We tried to buy another little chunk of property on the other side so that we could do covered parking, and the city wasn't interested in selling us any more land. So we sit as we are, and that's fine. But moving forward, those two pieces of property are very important to that whole area. there's our building, the Carmore block. Across the street is another commercial residential building. And then kitty corner is the new Thunderbird building, which is also commercial residential. There's a real flavor happening there. And the building across the street has the same sort of structure, architectural structure as what ours does. With the historic portion of our building, we've tried to retain the heritage quality moving forward, and in the 30 years that we've owned that building, excuse me, we've tried to keep it as historic as we can, but also allowing for development to happen within that building, so that we've got, not the old wooden windows. It's efficient. Everything we've done has made to that building has tried to make it more efficient as far as our residents being able to move forward in a sustainable way. So part of that would be that park-like setting. Keep retaining trees. Removing the brush from the hill would be very beneficial, but retaining as many of those trees and the access to the community to being able to use that. The parking lot at the back, lot 2, is parking, and it's used extensively through the summer. There's a lot of people that use the Lady Rose, or it's the Francis Barclay now, and they park there. There isn't a lot of parking in accessibility in Port Alberni, especially in that area to the Harbor Quay. There's a few parking spots, but with the development now of the Salmon Festival within that area, you know that parking lot is well used. So that needs to be also considered, that there should be some kind of public support with the park, with a park portion and parking. So moving forward, I cannot really see 200 units going in right there. I think that would quite spoil that whole area and take away something that's been there and is heritage, and it gives a real face to Port Alberni. I think it's a good one. When all of the planters were taken away, there was still the park. So it doesn't require a lot of maintenance, some mowing, and a bit of garbage cleanup. Thanks.
Thank you. And please encourage your tenants to go to the Let's Connect website. I think it's letsconnectpa.ca. Yeah, and because it's important for us to hear from the people who live in the immediate area. Who would like to be next? Mr. Franker.
Need my glasses. Ed Franker, 3845 Whittlestone Avenue. I come here today because I've always thought that both of these pieces of property have such huge value to Port Alberni. So first, I'd like to say that I am in favor of public spaces and green spaces and all that, and I think council needs to be open to all sorts of ideas from developers or the public. When it comes, when I think of public spaces, I think of Sydney Waterfront Park that has like a bandstand and a grassy area for people. They have festivals and live concerts there all summer long. We could have that same sort of thing, I think, there. I also think of Nanaimo's boardwalk and how it connects Bowen Waterfront Park to downtown. I think it's they're even planning on making that even longer than it already is. That's just a couple of examples of what can be done, to build our community and make our community a bigger and greater place. I think we need to find that kind of a centerpiece for Port Alberni, and we already have a start. We've got the Harbor Key. And so, but how did Nanaimo and Sydney end up with what they have? If you look around, it's great public spaces, big public spaces, but those public spaces are there because of the condo developments that are behind them. I don't think Nanaimo could have afforded to build all those boardwalks and everything if they didn't have all the tax base from those condo buildings and stuff, right? I also think that when you have a place like that, people are gonna come to it, and people are gonna use it. It's gonna have more traffic for businesses at the Carmore block and all the way up Argyle Street if you've got people visiting just because it's like Nanaimo and Sydney. So, get my notes straight here. Now, we have, this is a large piece of property overlooking our waterfront with huge potential. We don't know what it could be until we ask developers that actually do this for a living, people who actually have that big plan. We don't know what it could be, but what we can do is we can ask, and I think we need to look at what developers have for ideas. And I don't think what we should be doing is settling for two or three very basic buildings that have nothing else to offer but just some space for people to live in. What we need to do is we need to look for, we should only accept a plan that includes public spaces, also includes boardwalks like Nanaimo. So maybe a boardwalk all the way down along the bottom side. We were talking about getting rid of the weed trees and stuff that are down on the bank overlooking the harbor area. Well, maybe a developer would want to put a boardwalk down along there. You know, I think we can also look for developers that want to build on a theme that's already there with the Carmore block. It's a beautiful building. It's history for Port Alberni, and it's a beautiful building. We've got the train station across the street. We've got the Harbor Key. We've got Tai Landing. All that sort of stuff is already, it's a huge start for Port Alberni, but it all needs to be connected together. And if we find a developer that sees that same vision, I think we could have a huge space that everybody on Vancouver Island would want to come and visit from time to time. So, you know, and once you get a couple hundred people living there, it's going to be the place to be in Port Alberni, and maybe even the whole Central Island if we get the right developer. So I feel that council has an obligation, I think, to put out an RFP to find out exactly what developers really see in this property and what they would like to do with it. If we don't get anything really promising and fruitful out of it, then we don't do anything with it, because I don't want to see just a couple of basic buildings on that property. But I think we need to put on an RFP, maybe have some caveats on it with what we want it to look like, or, you know, how we want them to blend with the theme of that part of town or whatever. But I think we have to put out an RFP. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We have a couple people here who haven't spoken still. Who would like to speak next? Come on up. Oh, sorry.
Madam Mayor, Council, my name is Lyle Boffey. I live at 3381 Waterfern Drive, and I just moved here. We lived in Port Alberni for 15 years. I moved away for work. My family moved away for work, and now I'm back. And what I've seen, or what I haven't seen in those 10 years, is a lot of progress. There are some things that are different, but everything seems to be stable. And when I see an opportunity like this, I see a smaller Granville Island. I see a smaller Victoria Key. And I think the opportunity is absolutely huge for the community. The reason that I see for developments of this sort are the mixed development, where you have the condos, you have the commercial space, is the people. It brings people to Port Alberni. They want to live here. It gives the cruise ship people that come in, the first thing they see is a development of that nature, and they want to come back. They want to come back and visit when they're off the ship. They might want to come back and live in one of those condos. And not only that, it'll strengthen the rest of the key part of the community. I went for a walk around there on Sunday, and I was surprised. 3/4 of the buildings were closed. If you have these type of facilities there, the people are walking around day and night, and those commercial developments that people own here and they make their living from, they have extra days. They have Monday and Sunday that they're closed right now to bring in revenue, to pay taxes, and boost the community. And I think, you know, to be perfectly honest, I mean, I'm one of the guys that sits at home and says, oh yeah, this is cool. And all I ever hear is the people that say, don't do it. Well, I thought, now's the time to change. This opportunity has changed me. I'm here, and I'm saying that I see that as a huge, huge benefit to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brian?
Oh, thank you. 10684 Taylor Arm Drive. As Penny said, we've owned the Carmar for over 30 years now, and I was at the 2005 meeting at the Capitol Theatre. It was a lot different than today. But I'm not completely opposed against development of that area. I agree with the second to last speaker in quite a few of his points, but there is probably a need for parking in that area because of the Salmon Festival now and show and shine and stuff like that. So I'd like to see a little bit of parking left and a little bit of park left, and some developer that takes that into account. Basically, yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Come on up, Mr. Savard.
Dan Savard from right at the bottom of Argyle, 5505 Argyle. As being a fairly new business person in the area, with our company Swept Away In, and having come from a bigger center, Toronto area, we've always had the vision when we came to Port Alberni, and the reason we stayed in Port Alberni was because we saw the opportunity. And we've looked at this piece of property here since we've come to town, and we see its strategic placement in the community. And so we're really for having something developed on this piece of property, and something that's more mixed density use, something that mixed to high, maybe even density, because it does have the ability to start a nucleus down in that area that I believe will spread further up the road. I think it could be kind of the new Woodwards of Port Alberni, if you will, where it's got a lot of mixed use and a lot of ability to start that development down in that area. I hear what you say about, you know, having a boardwalk and whatnot, and you know, you got to remember that road that goes right in front of that is a commercial road. There's a lot of trucks going through there, and it's a very busy spot. But I believe in having maybe a stairways that goes over top and gets down to where everybody does want to go and play. Might be an ideal solution to that. But yeah, I see a lot of positive potential for that spot, and I hope that someone takes it on and the city approves a really awesome development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay. Council, any further questions or comments? Councillor Haggard?
If you see what's happening on Argyle Street, development is gradually growing up closer to 3rd Avenue, so I think it's going to be very exciting times in the next few years in that area, and I think having some kind of quality development there will just add to it and speed it up, and I think it will turn on to 3rd Avenue as well. So I think it's going to be a good thing if you get a good quality proposal.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no more input, I want to thank everyone who took the time to come and give us input today. And just a reminder to everyone that you can submit further input online. There is a survey on letsconnectpa.ca where we're taking feedback as well. And there's a conversation going on social media if you want to dive into that. Or not. That's right. And with that, would somebody like to move adjournment? Is there a seconder? All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much for coming.